When I started this channel, my original intention for my content was to draw parallels between the social justice movement and the Soviet Union, appealing to history as a means of expressing my concerns about the direction our present-day society is taking. What the channel evolved into, however, was an unfolding esoteric project, an exercise in questioning and explaining why I believe the things I believe. I've explored topics from history, biology, anthropology, philosophy, and political theory, and what I bring you now is the apex of that project, the synthesis of all the arguments that have come before as I arrive at this ultimate conclusion. Social justice is a religion. Now, it goes without saying that there are some very immediate parallels to be drawn between the tenets of social justice and the doctrines of Western Abrahamic religions. I think that both the skeptically minded and those who learn from history will recognize the authoritarian strand that runs through both social justice and conservative or fundamentalist forms of religion. The claim to moral authority, for example. Just as the religious zealot will claim that the only way to live a good and moral life is absolute adherence to God's word, whatever that may be in any given faith, the social justice activist will demonize those who don't subscribe to the notions of white privilege, or who don't support feminism or Black Lives Matter or what have you. What the zealot calls a sinner or a blasphemer, the activist calls a bigot, but in truth, neither accusation indicates any kind of moral deficiency, simply a failure to comply with dogma. Dictating what others can say or do or think is a hallmark of both schools of thought. Both even have their own versions of original sin. Christianity has the sin of Eve that condemned humanity to be born in sin, and social justice has the notion of privilege, which forces individuals to bear the moral responsibility of their ancestors. However, I see these parallels as minor at best. To draw every doctrinal link between social justice and religion seems a little tit-for-tat, and would essentially amount to nothing more than a very compelling coincidence. This approach doesn't really tackle the big, fundamental factors that make social justice and religion the same thing at their core, and those are the things I want to focus on today. If you ask me, the one thing that makes social justice no different from a religion in its principles and practice is a common theme that's run throughout my videos. This theme is the convenience of social justice, and by referring back to my previous arguments, we can analyze this convenience at three levels: biologically, intellectually, and philosophically. In my video, Is Social Justice an Evolved Trait?, I detail the evolutionary benefits of group behavior. In the primitive days of human hunter-gatherer societies, it was beneficial to our survival and reproduction to create groups that were held together by shared values and behaviors. To belong to a strong, cohesive in-group meant that you could more easily receive the material benefits from those within the group, and the more unified the group was in its values, the more likely its members were to survive and reproduce. I alluded to religion as a byproduct of this evolutionary strategy. Religion is a cohesive in-group whose shared value is the idea of a god, which individuals in the group collectively rally behind and worship. Over time, other ideas and values have been adopted by a number of religions. Ideas about the origin of the universe, about death and the afterlife, about the nature of humanity, and about moral rights and wrongs. And regardless of whether any of these ideas are true or not, it's beneficial for you to conform to them, because to do so will mark you as a trusted member of the in-group and you'll receive all the material benefits that come with that. Rather than having to sacrifice your time and energy to get all your resources on your own, you can rely on the network of your in-group, just as long as you comply. This strategy costs us so few of our own resources. It is, in a sense, biologically expedient. And it's this same kind of expedient group behavior that is a cornerstone of the social justice movement. The narratives of the social justice movement, true or not, serve to signal oneself as a member of the in-group. Those who vocally support Black Lives Matter and feminism, and who believe in the neo-Marxist notions of oppressive and oppressed classes, will be given social capital and cooperation by other social justice activists, creating the same kind of in-group cohesion that has allowed religions to perpetuate over all of human history. Our brains still recognize belonging to such a group as an effective way to pass on our genetic material, so adopting the ideas of social justice comes naturally to most people, especially when they see lots of other people doing the same thing. Evolutionary speaking, it's risky to argue a dissenting opinion, so it's much more biologically convenient to conform. And what ideas are the easiest to conform to? It's the ones that are easy to wrap your head around, the ones that appeal to the masses, the ones that we can grasp without a lot of effort or thinking on our part. Religion and social justice are biologically convenient because they are intellectually convenient. This is where we get into empirical truth claims made by religion. Would it be easier to master the most difficult problems of mathematics and physics to discover the natural origins of the universe? Problems that haven't yet been solved, by the way. Or would it be easier to simply say God did it and end your enquiry there? Would it be easier to study the Miller-Urey experiments and understand chemical structure and reactivity to figure out how the toxic gases of Earth's primordial atmosphere could have potentially formed the first organic compounds necessary for life? Or would it be easier to say that God simply poofed life into existence with a word? Would it be easier to understand the complex relationship between genes, organisms, and environments to discover how humans evolved from their taxonomic ancestors? Or would it be easier to say that man is made in God's image as an explanation for why we are the way we are? To me, these facile explanations of nature are really no different from the truth claims that are passed around within social justice. As I said in Nietzsche, Stalin, and the SJWs, would it be easier to think of society as a collection of 7 billion individuals with conflicting goals, or as a handful of collectives with one-way oppressor-oppressed power dynamics? Would it be easier to understand how our evolutionary past wired our brains towards certain behaviors and desires, or would it be easier to assert that everything we want and value is simply handed down to us by society? Would it be easier to understand basic economics and arithmetic in order to accurately evaluate the wage gap, or to cry sexism when confronted with the superficial 77 cents to a dollar figure? Humans are pattern-seeking animals. We assume that there's a reason behind everything we observe, an answer to every question, and we're so desperate for those answers that we accept the easiest ones the fastest. And these become the ideas that we rally behind and make sacred, make them beyond reproach. This is what leads to larger and more cohesive in-groups. Here, we see how the convenience of social justice interacts on two fronts. But while some truth claims can be made about topics that are rather empirical and cold and lifeless, others can affect us at the deepest levels of humanity. It's of little consequence to our day-to-day lives what the origins of time and space are, but what if you start making claims about things like morality, and existence, and the purpose of human life? Questions of science are difficult cognitively, to be sure, but questions of human existence are things we struggle with our entire lifetimes. How do I lead a good life? What is my purpose? How do I contribute to the world? These are questions that have sent people spiraling into crises, driven them mad with doubt, caused them to reshape their whole lives because they're just so damn important to us. These are the most profound questions of the human experience, and they're important to us because, well, it's our experience. They're questions about us, the answers to which can bring us joy and fulfillment, and the struggle with which can bring us fear, angst, and depression. And they're hard questions. Purpose is a hard thing to pin down because, in a hardcore realist sense, there's no such tangible thing as a purpose. Determining one's purpose is a subjective exercise. How are you going to figure out what yours is without being able to point to something external to yourself and say, "Look, there's my purpose. That's the nature of my existence"? Well, that's yet another easy answer that religion hands down to us. According to traditional Western religious thought, humanity's purpose is to, in some way or another, align oneself with God, to serve God, to unite one's soul with God, to recognize the divine element within humanity itself. This is a purpose that God intended for us when He designed us, much in the way that a hammer is designed with the purpose of hammering a nail. It determines your purpose, your essence, what makes you you before you're able to decide for yourself. And as I said at the end of a philosophical argument against safe spaces, social justice is no different. It tells us that our essence is boiled down to nothing more than our races, our genders, our sexual orientations. It tells us that there is something innate in us that determines the way we think, act, and exist. The conditions of our birth, not our individual personhood as we choose to shape it, are the guidelines by which we should orient our lives. Why? Because shaping our lives on our own is hard. It takes a lot of experience, a lot of struggle, and a lot of self-reflection to decide what kind of person you are, what kind of person you want to be, and how to live a good life. Social justice gives us the answers to both of these questions. If you're a straight white male, then the person you are is the oppressor. The person you should want to become is one who sheds themselves of their privilege, and the way to live a good life is to uplift those who have been kept down by your mere existence on this earth. If you're anything but a straight white male, then the person you are is the victim. The person you should want to become is one who is liberated, and the way to live a good life is to aid your downtrodden brethren in the dismantling of the despotic establishment that has kept you down since the inception of human society. Everything you need to proceed through your life is predisposed simply by virtue of your existence. Having personal agency and deciding for yourself what you want and what you believe is rendered impossible by the preconditions of the ideology. A black man who opposes Black Lives Matter, he has internalized racism. A woman who opposes feminism, she has internalized misogyny. The personal journey of the individual is negated by the essence of the collective. There is no struggle to decide one's beliefs, one's values, or one's life purpose. And by circumventing that struggle, social justice is philosophically convenient. And as I said before, in our desperation for the answers to our existential questions, these convenient ideas are the ones that are the easiest to accept, the kinds of ideas that form a religious in-group, the kinds of ideas that are handed down to us from any ideology. And this brings me back to the main thesis of my very first video, Nietzsche, Stalin, and the SJWs, that making a religion of an ideology is, ultimately, inevitable. As you might have been able to tell, I am no lover of religion as we refer to it in common parlance. In my teenage years, I was deeply influenced by the new atheist movement, and by the ideas of Hitchens and Harris especially. Today, I regard myself as an anti-theist. Not quite a militant atheist, as Richard Dawkins described in his TED Talk, but someone philosophically opposed to the doctrines of Western religion and preferring to advocate for secularism and empirical reasoning as the best modes of thought and behavior. As such, I'm naturally suspicious of any claims to truth or morality that are distinctly religious, or resemble a religious or faith-based approach. Despite this, however, I also recognize religion as an integral part of the human experience. So integral, in fact, that I would argue that we need religion. A bizarre thing to hear from an anti-theist, I'm sure, but think about what I've discussed in this video. Religion isn't constrained to Judaism, or Christianity, or Islam, or any of the other major world religions. It isn't just a set of doctrines and institutions. It's a behavior in which we adopt certain ideas, collectively rally behind them, and make them sacred, whether that thing be an object, a god, an ideology, or even just a set of values that we all share. Biologically, intellectually, philosophically, religion is something we crave. It's how we maintain human connection in our societies. It's how we foster community. But religion also serves an even more profound purpose. It's how we make sense of the universe, of our own lives, of existence itself. The universe is fucking crazy. It's so insanely huge that the powers of human imagination can't even produce an inkling of a concept of its scale. And here we are, specks of carbon on a blue dot floating in an endless roaring sea of dark matter, invisible to the eyes and inaudible to the ears of the cosmos. And yet, here we find ourselves, fixated on the tomorrow and tomorrow that creeps on in this petty pace from day to day, anxious about what we're going to make of our lives. Is it so much to ask for answers to the questions that make us tremble with existential dread? Is it so much to ask that we feel just a little bit grounded amidst the chaos and absurdity of the universe, of existence? Our communities, our values, these are the places where we find fulfillment as humans, where our urge to be part of a higher purpose is satisfied. This is just a part of the human condition, and whether you like it or not, we all participate in this to some degree. Don't you feel some sense of solidarity with those who share your political or philosophical opinions? Why would you be following this channel if you didn't? That's because your primitive instincts are telling you that those people are friends, that together you form the first makings of, in some sense, a community. It satisfies your desire to participate. But this is a double-edged sword. If we need that desire satisfied, then we'll take anything to satisfy it. even something that's bad for us. Even oppressive forms of religion that command moral authority and persecute dissenters. Even political philosophies that wreak death and destruction under a facade of equality and prosperity. Even ideologies that condemn straight white men as inherently and uniquely evil. And as the church has gradually been left behind by the educated upper-middle-class echelons of society, it has left in its wake a great rift in our psyche, a vacuum in which that desire is left unfulfilled. Thus, I believe that society has begun to turn political ideology into a religion in its own right, just as Nietzsche predicted. The reason that people on both sides of the aisle now react so radically when their political worldview is challenged is because their brains are stuck in their evolutionary past, when such a challenge would have been a threat to their very survival. Needless to say, this is an extremely destructive and retrograde behavior. Splitting the world into in-groups and out-groups as we do now may strengthen the in-groups and out-groups themselves, but it neglects the largest group of all, the human race. If we want to satisfy our urge to contribute to something greater than ourselves without creating the negative repercussions of collectivist thought, then let us contribute to humanity itself. Let us rally behind the human project and make it sacred. Let us work toward the benefit of all people. Let us be inclusive, and I mean truly inclusive. Let us not demonize those with differing ideas, whether you be a social justice activist or a traditional conservative. Let us not discriminate against black or white, woman or man, gay or straight. And the only way for us to accomplish this goal is not to treat people simply as members of their demographic, but as individuals. Individuals have what collectives lack. They have humanity. Individuals aren't a political ideology, they aren't a race, they aren't a gender, they aren't an orientation. They're people with unique beliefs and aspirations. As Joseph Stalin himself said, a single death is a tragedy, a million deaths is a statistic. And when you treat all individuals with the dignity they deserve, well, then you give dignity to all of humanity. This is why I believe that individualism is not only the best way to structure a society, but also the best way to treat other people. It's what I see lacking in our culture at the moment. And if groupthink is inevitable to humanity, then I want our groupthink to be centered around a belief in individualism. It's a great irony on its surface, but it's one that I believe will ensure the survival and prosperity of our species, and of the human project that we've worked for so long to develop. We carry the torch of that project now. Let us be able to pass it on to those who will follow us.